Welcome back to the darker side of the after show, a very special darker side of the after show, the season finale after show as well for season 3. And you'll have seen it promoted on social media. You'll have seen the fact that we've just done our final episode of the season on Tommy the Duke Morrison, and Johnston is here on the after show, which is an unusual thing for us because it's normally, it's normally yourself, Lukey. But I'm delighted to be joined, as we all are, by Trisha Morrison, the wife of the late great Tommy Morrison, who is here on this episode to talk about the story, some of the elements of this story, some of the inaccuracies of maybe the quotations of people that were in this particular story, and of course, to talk to us and to you guys listening about all the hard work and constant courtroom battles and legal battles that she's been undergoing over the past 10 years to try and essentially clear Tommy Morrison's name. So, Trisha, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Sean, everybody, hi. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, there's a couple of things, Trisha, that we want to sort of get done from the off, and I suppose it's a little bit of an elephant in the room moment. So we did the story on Tommy. You've listened to the story on Tommy. You pointed a few things out to us on the story on Tommy, and I know, Johnston, you in particular felt like maybe there was a little bit of a misinterpretation over some of the comments you made at the end of the story when we sort of have the chance to have our say on what we kind of feel about generally what has happened throughout the whole story. But this is really controversial because obviously this is something, Trisha, you're going through at the moment. You're trying to essentially battle against the different parties involved to be able to get that clarification and clear Tommy's name. So, Johnston, I'm gonna let you have the floor and have that conversation, and obviously with Trisha, you being able to respond.
Okay.
Yeah, Trish. Yeah. I mean, look, from the off, look, firstly, I don't want to didn't want to discredit anything that you're doing, insult you in any way whatsoever. That was never my intention. I never wanted to sway the audience into thinking that I was diagnosing Tommy with HIV. I was HIV positive. So I just wanted to clarify that my final comments on that episode on Tommy was just me expressing my opinion on the evidence that we had sourced for it. So, I feel maybe I was misinterpreted, or you misinterpreted what I was trying to say. I did suggest, I've worked for the NHS for sort of over 20 years. So what I was saying was that it was more to do with the stigma that surrounds HIV and AIDS in general, not that Tommy had AIDS or HIV, as you're saying he didn't. I think that was, for me, my wife's been involved in AIDS and HIV, and it's like she's done the World AIDS Day. So the stigma around and the perception towards people, back then was bad. It wasn't good, and nowadays it's changed. So I think I failed to express myself in that manner. That I'm not a doctor. I'm certainly not that. I don't diagnose people with any HIV. I've got no medical background whatsoever. So, I think for me is I talk sometimes, my mind races before my mouth comes out. So I'll say something in the same breath, and you may have the assumption that I was saying that I felt that, Tommy had HIV and that's it, and that's concrete. That wasn't what I was trying to say. I was saying that I'm inclined to still sway towards that way with the evidence that we've sourced for this interview. That was where I was going with that. However, I didn't explain my reasons correctly. So I apologize for that if I upset you. That wasn't my aim, and it entirely was just literally off the cuff at the end of every episode that we do. So that was where that come from. So yeah, apologies for that. And the thing is as well, that's basically it really. The other end, I didn't mention the false positives. I think that's the other thing as well you mentioned, and I should have done that, which can occur in testing. So there's every side. There's a point to all sides, and I feel that maybe at the end I was probably going down one way rather than looking at your perspective and what you're fighting for. And I hope you're successful. I really do. I'm not making it. I'm not one of those deniers that are saying that he 100% had it. And I know this is a topic we're going to come to in the end. But this is your platform. So I've said my piece. I apologize if I upset you. I'm not diagnosing Tommy in any way. I didn't diagnose him. That wasn't my intention. So this is your flaw, and this is your platform to convince any doubters. Like I'm sort of I'm not saying I'm a doubter, but I lean towards both sides. So I'm not a complete set. I'm not saying 100% Tommy did have it, but I'm not entirely sure he didn't. So that's just my
Right.
opinion. Okay.
All right, Johnston. Yeah, well, what happened was, and I appreciate what you've just said. When Sean sent me a preview of what you did on Tommy, the rise and fall, I went through it, and he said, are there any inaccuracies or anything? And I actually typed up
3 pages worth.
immediately. Yeah, 3 pages of stuff that is just not right. And you got to remember, first of all, this is the first time us 4 of us have met. I've been in the courts, in the courts of law for the last 10 years. And I've followed the science. In addition to the sweet science, boxing, I've also followed the science of HIV/AIDS and trying to find out information about the virus. Did Tommy have it? Did he not have it? Who diagnosed him with it? Who didn't diagnose him with it? Who said that he had it and yet is not a physician and never drew blood, never did testing? So of course, when I hear something that you guys have put out, and not just you, but anybody, I will ask questions, right? I will ask what your sources are. And it's very clear your sources are, as you've mentioned a documentary with ESPN. You've mentioned a couple of books. Those 2 books, first of all, are written by people that have never boxed, never been in the ring, and never met Tommy, right? You classify one of those books as being the book written by Tommy Morrison's ex-wife. Well, actually, in court records, in her deposition, she says she never wrote that book, right? So these are the little inconsistencies, inaccuracies that I want to point out, and I'm so thankful that you gave me the platform to do it. I just wish that we could edit it out, actually, out of your whole show, because that's still something that's going to be out there that people are going to believe. So yeah, I'm grateful that you're having me on the show today, because I'd like to go through everything that I did find out and stuff that has been suppressed by the media that you guys have not put into your show because either you didn't know it or it's been left out.
Yeah, I think the difficulty we have, and I think this is something we said in private messages with yourself, Trisha, was that it's nigh on impossible to, unless you're actually living the fight that you have at the moment, unless you're actually living it, it's nigh on impossible to be able to present a 100% depiction of what's truly going on. So, like, the sources that were used were various books, were various newspaper articles, multiple different newspaper articles that were used for this episode. They were more in terms of misdemeanors and reported incidents many years before this whole HIV issue arisen, or whether it was made more of an issue, so to speak. These were more things that we were including as part of the show, because that's what the show is about. The show is about the darker side of boxing and trying to sort of present elements of a fighter outside of the ring, and what potential real bad things have happened to them, whether it's adverse childhood experiences or whether it be moments in their lives or where they've made a wrong choice that's led to something even worse. We're not here to talk all about what Tommy did do and what he was arrested for. We're here to talk about like the issues that you've encountered in trying to get an ultimate decision in terms of, did he have HIV, did he not have HIV, and from what you've sent back to us and what you've presented us with since the episode, is that actually there are a lot of inconsistencies with a lot of people involved with all of the cases that you've been involved in yourself, where it feels a little bit like some information has been presented and then some information has then been withdrawn and then some further information has been presented, and then again it's like you've been kind of stonewalled at certain points of time, and being told various different bits of information yourself, and then you've had to go away, do a bit more research, go back and say, actually, no, I don't agree with this, and this is why I don't agree with this. So this is really why I wanted you on, is to kind of, there are some elements of the show which we've used where there are quotations from various people that were around Tommy, and understandably so, there are going to be inaccuracies because that's going to be from a different person's perspective. So when you talk about a certain individual saying that they've said something about Tommy in particular, and actually that's not entirely true because that's just one person's biased view, and I suppose because you were with him for a period of time, you knew him, you knew what he was like, you can tell us more than what we don't know, and stories that we've presented where you can actually go, well, actually, yeah, you know, some of this is right, but it's not entirely right. This is what really happened. Hence the reason why I think it's good to get you on to actually dispel some of those myths and potential lies.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Yep. You know, do you want me to start with the lawsuit and everything so that you know?
Yeah, go for it. You go through the lawsuit and sort of explain in a little bit more detail of what's actually gone on there as opposed to what's been reported.
Right. Well, I listened to your show, and what I'm about to show you is stuff that was totally excluded from your show because you obviously weren't privy to all the information. You guys did a wonderful job, though. You know, you got to remember that Tommy came from a family where there was drugs, drink, women. You know, it was not a good situation for him, for a childhood, you know, for child or children to go through something like that. You know, it's not what he wanted. And in the end, the person that he was and became was a great human being who gave up drugs, right? Did drug rehab, turned himself around, didn't drink, and just stood with just one woman, right? That's all he felt he needed. So it was a huge learning curve for him. And then to be given a death sentence, which is literally what was given to him in 1996. Now, today is what, March 16th, 2023. Adrian Broner, which is another boxer, just signed with a 91-year-old Don King, right? Lots of money in front of him. That's just what's happened today. You know, just think of that situation. Go back to 1996. That was Tommy, right? He just signed on a multi-million-dollar contract with Don King for a 3-fight deal. There was Tyson involved. There was a lot of money, and he never gets to fight ever again. And you know, and people just go, oh, you know, sorry, you know, Tommy, you've got HIV, you're going to die by the time you get to your car. You know, and it's a story to everybody. But what you have to remember is that we're talking about a human being, right? And it was his life, and it's what he had to live through. And that's the person that I knew, Tommy Morrison, the real person that was totally sober for the years he and I knew each other and were together. And he would talk a lot about his feelings, about what happened and what happened to him once he was given this terrible diagnosis. In your timeline, in your program, you then show him, you know, with more drugs, more drink, weapons and stuff like that. If you look at the timeline, a lot of that really happened after the so-called diagnosis of HIV in Vegas that turned his life around. He spiraled into a huge depression. And basically, he's very honest in the books he wrote himself. And it says, you know, I've just been given a death sentence. I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to do whatever I want to. I've been told I'm going to die anyway. So that's what happened to Tommy. And then prior, all the events and everything, you're talking about a 19, 20-year-old kid who was out drinking, partying, but also was in the limelight of boxing as well. So you really have like 2 or 3 sections of Tommy Morrison life. When Tommy died, I had a post-mortem done on Tommy, and none of the sources that you've used, the books, the media, or ESPN/Disney Plus, have even mentioned it, but there was a post-mortem report done. And this is very, very important. It was authored and produced September 17th, 2013. And it's in court records, and it clearly shows that Tommy did not have HIV. Prior to that, 1 year prior, he also had an antemortem, which is what it's called in court records, and it shows again he did not have HIV/AIDS. And throughout the whole of the last year of his life, I had him tested for every single AIDS-defining disease that Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we all know, he's a worldwide name now, said that if you had AIDS, you would have one of those diseases. Tommy was tested by various physicians, and they all came back negative. So that's what made me start the lawsuit. And basically, I went to the commission and I said, you guys diagnosed Tommy with HIV, and when he died, he didn't have HIV. I got no response. I went to the physician in Vegas and I said the same physician that was there in '96. I said, you diagnosed Tommy with HIV and he didn't have HIV when he died. And the physician said, we never diagnosed him with HIV. So it was like, who diagnosed him with HIV? So that's what began the 10-year, almost 10-year lawsuit. There are 2 cases that went to the US Supreme Court. One was Muhammad Ali, which was Cassius Clay at the time, and the second one was Tommy Morrison. When you file a lawsuit, you have to do all the various books, you have to have the paperwork done and filed in a certain way. So I had to learn how to do that, right? But I got the lawsuit done, and I'm extremely happy with the results because everything that I show you is under oath and has probably affidavits to support them, but also court records. So I started with Vegas, guys. In court records, here's one record that I'm going to read to you. It's the CEO of the actual lab in Las Vegas. And he says, I conclude that Mr. Morrison was never infected with the HIV virus. That is the CEO of the lab in Vegas saying that. Docket number 136, page 9, lines 27 to 28. That's available for everybody to see. He even does an affidavit saying that. That is the CEO. Then the commission, and that was run by Bob Bennett right now, but obviously previous to that was somebody else. And the commission says, plaintiff, which is me, now recognizes that neither the state defendants, which is the commission, Mark Ratner and Dr. Margaret Goodman, nor Quest Diagnostics ever diagnosed Mr. Morrison as carrying the HIV virus. That's docket 174, page 7. That's a court record, okay? Then we have also the physician in Las Vegas, that's Dr. Robert Voy, okay? And I asked him whether he diagnosed Tommy with HIV. Well, he didn't respond, but his attorney, Dr. Counsel Mortensen, did. And he responded with, and this is in court records, it is important for you to understand that Dr. Voy did not diagnose and never has diagnosed Mr. Morrison as HIV positive. That comes from an attorney. And then we have Dr. Berliner, who did the weigh-in, and he also says, I have this day examined the above named person and find them in physical condition to engage in boxing, contest, or wrestling exhibition for the above date. And that was on February 9th, 1996. And he does an affidavit to go with that. And then in Vegas, again, we have Dr. Margaret Goodman, and I think we all know her. She's in charge of VADA, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association. And she was asked a question in court records, admit you can provide a document that confirms the diagnosis of the virus HIV in Tommy's blood on February 10th, 1996. She responds, deny. She cannot. She doesn't have a document. And here is her affidavit as well. So as far as people in Vegas, nobody diagnosed Tommy with HIV. Now, the judge himself, and that's Judge Richard F. Bulwer II, who was the fourth judge on this case, the other three recused themselves. He says in a court hearing, we wouldn't even be having this discussion if the test was specific for the existence of the virus or not. That's obviously why there's even the possibility of a claim the tests didn't test for the virus. And that comes from the judge. So as far as an HIV diagnosis goes, nobody diagnosed Tommy Morrison with HIV on February 10th, 1996, to have kicked him out of the sport of boxing. Any questions?
Johnston, I'm going to bring you into it just because I know I think you had a couple of things. I think it's more just clarity things, Trisha. It's more just trying to get a bit of clarity on things, because obviously there's so much conflicting information with this whole story, and you present a compelling argument for it. And I think what we're trying to establish here is why there is so much conflicting information. So I'm going to hand it to Johnston. I know you had a couple of things you wanted to ask as well.
Yeah, I suppose one thing I would like to mention was the Dr. James Hutton.
Yes.
So he was the follow-up test. So the follow-up test he apparently did, and he suggested that there was like a report. I think it was a Los Angeles Times. It may have been. I can't remember the exact newspaper. There was a couple, and they sort of had Tommy was with his family, with his mum, and he's with whoever else he was with at the time. And you read through the article, a couple of them, and they all suggested that the follow-up test was done, which was with Tony Holden. So you probably, I don't know if you've mentioned Tony Holden yet, but for the people that are listening, Tony Holden was his manager, not really his manager, as you pointed out as well, Trisha, to us, because of the fact, variety sources again do call Tony Holden his manager, and he was the guy that gave Tommy the news, wasn't he, as well? He was the third party that. So apparently, this is what we've sourced, was that Mark Ratner apparently told Tony, which he shouldn't have done. I mean, that's not right in itself, even if. And then it goes back on this, but he told Tony that Tommy was HIV positive, and then Tony Holden then told Tommy about it. Then he was obviously devastated, and then they done this follow-up test by James Hutton. So I don't know if you could give us a little bit of information on that, because that's another part of that where people say, well, that's another test that that was taken not from Nevada, which is what you've clearly pointed out in what you've just gone through there. So do you want to just clear that up for us?
Sure, absolutely. So Johnston, before we do that, so you're saying your sources say that who told Tommy he had HIV?
So it would have been the Nevada that would have done the initial test. So they're the ones that apparently what I read was that Tommy was supposed to have the test, and then he refused to do the test for religious grounds. This is what we've found. Then eventually he did do the test, and then it came back positive because that's what they presented to the media back in '96.
But who
it would
said
have been it would have been, well, I don't know it precisely. From what we gathered, Ratner was the lead commissioner. So he then
Right.
apparently he then told Tony Holden. I was listening to another one of your interviews. I think you said that as well. That
Right.
apparently Ratner has told Tony, and then Tony told Tommy. Is that correct? And then apparently Tony was the one who initiated this additional test. So yeah.
Right. That's right. Okay, so so you make good points there, good questions, and those were my questions too in the court of law. So I've got court documents here. So let's clarify the person that supposedly said to Tony Holden that Tommy had HIV, right? And that was supposedly Mark Ratner. So it's called an interrogatory, it's a question. And I go, please state with specificity all facts and identify all documents related and or concerning your license to practice medicine to deliver a diagnosis ringside on February 10th, 1996 to Tony Holden in the absence of Morrison and his attending physician. Mark Ratner responds, this responding party is not licensed to practice medicine, which is quite right in saying, right, and did not deliver a diagnosis on February 10th, 1996, ringside or at any other location to Tony Holden. So he is now saying that he never said that Tommy had HIV. Okay. Right. All right. So in Vegas right now, the only person that is saying that Tommy had HIV is Tony Holden. And Tony Holden was not Tommy Morrison's manager, never signed a management contract, and that's in his deposition. And in fact, in Vegas, Tommy had a contract directly with Don King, and Tommy was his own manager on his application. He was self-managed. But Tony Holden also had a contract with Don King. And so, you know, you can't be a promoter and a manager. That you legally can't be a promoter and a manager and an advisor all at the same time. As far as Vegas goes, we have nobody that has actually done a diagnosis. So the person that tells Tommy he has HIV remains to be Tony Holden. Are we in agreement here?
Yep. By the sound. And the other thing, just bringing in Dr. James Hutton and his apparent follow-up test. Can you explain that to us in some more detail?
Absolutely, Johnston. So, okay, so in Vegas, what they should have done is they should have done a second test, perhaps drew more blood. They should have had even a report of the results of the test, because no report was ever actually authored and presented until the lawsuit in 2014. That's a long time between 1996 and 2014. Plus, there should have been a physician that sat Tommy down and told him he had the deadliest virus in the world, right? And he's going to die and he needs treatment. And we also need to make sure who else might have it because of him. None of that happened. He gets shut down, flown out to Tulsa, and you mentioned a name, Dr. James Hutton, right? Okay, where did you get that name from?
I got that name from, where did we get it from again? Oh God, I think we mentioned it could have been from the book actually. Yes, it would have been from the book that he did an independent test. And I believe, okay, right, this is your part. So you're probably going to mention this, but you said that court records indicate that he may have used that same test and it wasn't his own. Yeah,
exactly. So so in court records, docket 175, and it's page 99, lines 10 to 14. Records from Dr. James P. Hutton, an infectious disease specialist with Tulsa, show that he initially examined the claimant, which would be Tommy, on March 5, 1996, at which time he noted that the claimant had been found to be HIV positive during testing that was performed in Nevada prior to a heavyweight boxing match that the claimant was scheduled to participate in. So basically, this Dr. James Hutton in Tulsa used the results of Nevada, right, of February 10 or 9, 96, and there are no results on the record from a Dr. James Hutton. The only people that stand up in front of the podium in Tulsa, which you'll remember, everybody's crying, Tommy's up there on his own saying he's got HIV. So you've got the whole world now believing Tommy saying he's got HIV. Yet a few months down the line, he's saying, no, I don't have HIV, and they're not believing what he's saying, right? But this time they want to believe. So standing next, I don't know, can you see it okay?
Yep.
At the bottom here, you've got Tommy at the podium. Standing next to him is not a physician, it's Tony Holden again, right? Why is there not a physician standing next to this guy that's supposed to be dying? And then at the top here, if you can recall, you've got Magic Johnston and his physician when Magic Johnston does his announcement to the world, right? I'll never forget that day Magic Johnston did. And I'll actually never forget the day Tommy did, because I too was in Vegas during that time, even though I had never met him. So, you know, you've got your sources there, James Hutton, that's great. Show me a test result then from Tulsa on February, would have had to have been February 11th or 12th or 13th or 14th. There isn't one, never been produced.
Okay. Just to pacemonitor.com is where we got most of these names from as well, which is the court documents that are available online. So you can go onto that and you can see just for other viewers as well that all the court documents are on there from 2016. So a lot of those names have been mentioned, and that's where so just to clear that up, that's where Mr. Hutton's name come from. I suppose one of the other questions for me as well is the situation where Dr. Keisler, she was the baby doctor.
The baby doctor, yes.
As I think you put it. So, sorry, Sean, you may have wanted to ask another question, but I'm going to jump in here because it's sort of on the back of that. So, and I know you mentioned, so Dawn Gilbert's memoir, you're saying that she was on oath and she said that she didn't actually write this book.
Right.
Because she does again. See, Dr. Hutton comes up. So this was something that she apparently had in her memoir, which was after a full examination, Dr. Hutton told Tommy that HIV was rampant in his system. According to him, the numbers were off the charts apparently, but yet he can't provide you with that positive test. So if they're off the charts, it's a bit confusing as to why he can't produce it. So going on to my next point, which was Dr. Keisler. So she founded Kiesling. Sorry, yes, let me get her name right. So Dr. Kiesling. So she founded the Bedford Research Foundation in 1996. Ironically, she's a scientist that helped Tommy and Dawn Gilbert conceive. Apparently, documented $15,000 on one cycle, which was on an ESPN article. So what, $30,000 for the second article to finally have a successful IVF treatment. Now, I mean, my question is again. So Dr. Kiesling, you would assume that if you're going to be doing IVF, that at some point or another, she would have tested his sperm, his specimen, to match with the egg.
Right.
My question is, can you not detect if someone is HIV positive? And why would she go through a process of cleansing and having to go through all this if he was negative? So that'd be my question to you.
Okay, here is Dr. Kiesling, okay, and she is actually not a doctor. She is a PhD, okay, scientist, so she's not a doctor of medicine, all right. The facility that you speak of was not FDA approved. I think you forgot to mention that. Right, it was never FDA approved. It was actually shut down for a little bit, and I think they've reorganized themselves as some other company now. I've spoken to Dr. Kiesling, very nice lady. I asked her to send me results of the sperm washing because as the widow, I can ask for medical results. If you have a look at the court records, you'll find that there aren't any results whatsoever of the medical sperm washing there. The reason why he also went up there, you probably don't know this, but he'd had a vasectomy, right?
Yes, he did. I did read that. I did, and she didn't reverse it, but she had to go deeper. Or I don't know. Yeah, she went into some detail. That's right.
That's right. And so she had to get some sperm out, right? So that's what she did. And that was the procedure that she did, was to get the sperm out. Yeah.
And to get Tristan to be born. But so I'm confused why, because she doesn't even get mentioned in a court document. She gets mentioned in a couple of articles, and if you go sourcing it, I know she's not a physician, but is there nothing she would have had on record that could have suggested anything towards? No, I just feel that she wouldn't have known. She's taken his word. I mean, like, it's crazy to think that there was no backup. I mean, I know it's only 96, but if you're being diagnosed, I've worked for NHS for over 20 years. Again, I mean, I'm bringing that into it because of the fact is that I've dealt with appointments. I've been around doctors, pediatricians, physiotherapists, and everything's followed up by a letter, Trisha. Is it not? I always think, if you get diagnosed with something, if you're sitting in the doctor's office, so you've spoken to your doctor and he's told you that you are HIV positive, it's not just that conversation you have. For one, you probably got your family closest beside you, supporting you. But then the next thing is a follow-up letter and then support. What happened? Why didn't he get any of that? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I think maybe because of the 90s, everybody was scared anyway. They didn't know, a lot of information. Also, the viral load tests. Are you familiar with those?
Vaguely, I know you can have a low count. You can have low, but it doesn't necessarily mean.
The T cell counts.
The T cell count. That's right.
The T cell counts. And in fact, there's this physician here from the CDC. And believe me, I did my research too. I just asked the same questions. Okay, there's Dr. Michelle Owen, and the CD4 test kit wasn't even available in 1996. So if you're talking about his numbers being off the charts, there were no charts in 1996. Timeline is very, very important. And she also says here, and this is directly from the CDC, it is possible to have a very low CD4 count caused by other diseases such as cancer, other infectious diseases, genetic orders, autoimmune disorders, etc. So at no point, Johnston, did they ever test Tommy for any other disorders that could trigger a false positive? No, at no point between 1996 until we actually got to Nebraska. I wanted to find out what was going on.
Yeah. Sean, do you want to jump in, Sarah?
No, of course. Sorry, I'm just I'm listening with intent to sort of hear both conversations that are going on at the moment, and I think like what all I sort of see with what's been going on and what you've been doing, Trisha, is that there seems to be a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of finger pointing going on between the professionals who have said like, look, we're now saying actually we never give him a diagnosis, and then they're swearing under oath, and they're doing the affidavits, and they're doing everything that you've brought into the show and you've told us about, and it's I just can't sort of make heads or tail of why you're still being stonewalled at the highest level if people are going under oath and going on the stand and telling a different story to what they were telling all those years ago, and why you can't get clarity on it, and why you seem to be being stonewalled. That's the part that I don't I want to see an open and shut case. I want to see him go, do you know what, look, we made a mistake, actually. This was incorrect, and we need to
Yeah.
rectify this by saying why it was incorrect, and getting the right specialist to say those words. But what seems to be happening, from what I can interpret, is that you're going through the different court levels and presenting information which you've gone off and got, and then they're trying to, it feels like, every which way, sort of use different excuses, so to speak, as to not take it further, or to
Yeah.
blame, because there was the preserved tissue conversation as well,
Yeah.
where that came
Yeah.
up, and then it was said that because it was before 2017, that it should have been tested before then, and because it hasn't been,
Right.
did they throw, that was the one they threw out, weren't it, where they said, no, actually, we're not going to do that now?
Yeah, that's right. I took it to the US Supreme Court because, just like you said, I wanted a definite ending to it. Sean, if this guy here, who is a scientist, right, came out with an anti-mortem that says no HIV, right, printed it off. If this guy, Dr. Philip Smith, who's also a scientist, called me and said Tommy's negative for HIV in September 2013, and this guy here, Dr. Stephen Hendricks, who worked together with Dr. Anthony Fauci at the NIH from 84 to 87 and produced a post-mortem report showing that Tommy had no HIV in his system, and they photo imaged all Tommy's blood to look for it. If this isn't enough, why, right? And also, why are these documents just not mentioned at all in your sources, in your ESPN? Why have the media stopped completely reporting that? And then to find that tissue, preserved tissue in Nebraska, which could easily be tested for HIV again, right? But what happened was the defendants, the lab, they made out a disc and they put all Tommy's records on there, right? And it wasn't the original disc. They kept the original disc, and they provided a disc to the court and to me with records that they wanted us to see. Okay, but they missed hundreds of pages. And when the US Supreme Court shut me down because of statute of limitations, they said, you should have done all this back in 1996 and 2017. I had the facility send me a flash drive with the documents that they had sent the defendants. And on that disc, that tissue that I was trying to get tested had actually been tested, and it was negative for any AIDS diseases and HIV. So they withheld that too, right? Why would they do that?
It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like what I can't understand, not from your side, Trisha, but what I can't understand is why, if they do a post-mortem and an anti-mortem and they say there's no HIV in Tommy's system, surely, and again, I quote, I'm putting my disclaimer in, I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, I'm not trained, but surely the common sense logic says that if none of that came up in any of those post-mortem and anti-mortem, then surely either Tommy was a medical miracle if he did have HIV, or he never had it in the first place.
Right.
And that's the question that comes across my mind, because either he's a medical miracle or he just never had it in the first place, and someone somewhere down the line, they messed up, and they messed up big time. And obviously this is why you're doing what you're doing at the moment, is because someone somewhere down the line has potentially made a huge grave error which affected the trajectory of this man's life,
Totally.
in part of why when we tell the story we tell, it kind of goes alongside the fact that as soon as this happens to him in 96, his life goes down the pan. His life goes
Yeah.
down the pan because of how this was affecting his life. And this is essentially the elements of the show where it fits into that narrative of what we tend to cover. But surely if the medical evidence is there to suggest that he didn't have HIV when they did the post-mortem and the anti-mortem, like I
Yeah.
say, either he's a medical miracle or he never had it in the first place. And I don't understand why people just don't want to bring an end to that conversation and just sort of say, look, we've had three different specialists sit
Yeah.
there and say, actually, no, this wasn't the case. He never had it, and actually, some false reporting went on. Why do you think that this hasn't had its closure yet? What reason possibly could they have for stretching something out like this? Because it's been it's 96. We're going into we're in 2023 now,
Years.
so it's a long time. Why would
Yeah.
someone want to drag this
Yeah.
out for a certain length of time? What do you
Yeah.
think? What do you think? Like, honestly, what do you think the reason is why this is where it's at the moment, and why no sort of admissions are being made? Do you think
Right.
do you think, Trisha, it's because nobody wants to be held liable for something that went wrong all them years ago?
Right. It's too late to hold somebody liable. Financially, there is nothing to gain from this, right? The only thing to gain, which is still pretty huge, is to clear Tommy's name, but also to make sure that this does not happen to anybody else ever again. It's almost like the Canelo, false positive with the meat, right? It's like the Ben with the egg situation, right?
Connor.
The false, but yeah. This is also another false positive issue, right? It's possible that people can test false positive on an HIV test and actually not have the virus. Okay, so if he didn't have the virus, then that meant that he would never actually then ever get AIDS, which he never got either. So you mentioned earlier, Sean, that there were three experts. Well, there's more than three experts. I'm going to show you the faces of the guys that actually did testing on Tommy for AIDS diseases. Now, Anthony Fauci, who HIV AIDS belongs to, right? I mean, let's be honest, he's been working on it for 40 years here in America at the NIH. He says that if you have PCP, which is pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, or Kaposi sarcoma, you have now AIDS, full-blown AIDS. All right, so coming back to when you had mentioned that, well, Tommy's mother said that he had AIDS, full-blown AIDS, right? I mean, that's all over ESPN.
Yep.
Okay, so in order to have, and again, she's not a physician. She's a sweet little 80-year-old lady that's not a physician, never drew his blood, never examined it, never went to college for AIDS. She just said it, right? And so the media ran with it. Well, I didn't just run with it. I actually had these physicians test Tommy. So here we've got Dr. Rad, and he tested Tommy for PCP, came back negative. And again, remember, you have to have PCP or Kaposi sarcoma to have AIDS, as per Anthony Fauci. Here we have Dr. Nakamoto, who tested Tommy, and that came back normal. Here we have Dr. Dugan, who was also with Quest Diagnostics, no virus in him. Here we have Dr. Cooley. She tested him for Legionella and pneumococcus, which is other infectious diseases. They came back negative. This guy here, Dr. Jason Carey, tested him for mycobacteria, growth cultures, came back negative. Then we have here Dr. Gannison tested for PCP, that came back negative, right? These are real people, right? Dr. Manasek tested Tommy for PCP, came back negative. Okay, I'm carrying on. Is Dr. Nugent tested Tommy for JVD, which is another AIDS disease, came back negative. This lady here, who's also a doctor, went into his lungs and macrophages, where you can also find HIV, no viral inclusions, no malignant cells. Nothing was wrong there. Then this one also went into his pleural fluid from his lungs, no malignant cells. There's more than 3 experts, okay? No respiratory virus. This one here tested him for a whole bunch of stuff and all came back negative, but he came back positive for hemolytic anemia, okay? Hemolytic anemia causes a false positive on HIV tests. Dr. Dehan came back negative for malignancies and did microscopic examination. This lady here, Dr. Davidson, tested his lungs and it came back negative. I'm going to carry on. Give me another couple of minutes here, right? Okay, we all know Dr. Anthony Fauci, right? He's the one that says you have to have pneumocystis carinii and Kaposi sarcoma in order to be classified as somebody with AIDS. This lady here, beautiful lady, Dr. Riley, she's the one that had tested that tissue and it came back no Kaposi sarcoma, which means no AIDS defining disease. This guy here, Dr. Bauman, no PCP. This guy here came back with Dr. Heasty, no CMV, which is another AIDS defining disease. This lady here, Dr. Steckelberg, no histoplasmosis, right? This gentleman here, no JCP virus. This is all people testing Tommy, right? No Kaposi.
Is this all post-mortem, Trisha? Is this all post-mortem?
This is all while he's alive.
Right,
this is
okay.
all while he's alive in 2012, 2013. These guys here, no pneumocystis carinii, no CMV, no PCP. You know, these are doctors that are up there that do this for a living, no JCP virus. It's exhausting, but these are people that tested Tommy for HIV, AIDS, and found no evidence in him, okay? So what was wrong with him? What was the downfall? He came out of jail with an insect bite to his chest. And that insect bite caused him to have surgery on his chest. And the surgeon in Tennessee left 12 foot of surgical gauze in Tommy's chest for 1 week. And it caused sepsis, septic shock, septicemia. And we're talking 12 foot of surgical gauze. And this is 12 foot of surgical gauze, all tightly packed in Tommy's chest, right? And this was the beginning of the downfall of Tommy Morrison. You can see how wide it is. Obviously, it wasn't white when it came out of his chest. It was covered in blood clots. And that night when the nurse pulled it out of his chest at home, he fell and his leg had given way. His head went straight through the wall. He landed on the side of his neck. And we didn't know until a few months later he'd actually paralyzed the side of his neck, which meant that everything that he was eating and drinking through his throat was going straight into his lungs and causing aspiration pneumonia. This is where it began. And in fact, one of the sources of your documentary that you put together, and I'll call it a documentary, is based on somebody, again, Tony Holden, saying that this never happened. He doesn't even mention it. It's not even mentioned in ESPN 30 for 30. But it really did happen, that the surgeon had left all this gauze in Tommy's chest. And that's what the beginning of his downfall was. And it's just a horrible situation. It happened. This was the abscess on the side of Tommy's chest, right here. And that's what had to be drained. Once we took out the all the gauze, that's, you could put your whole hand in there. Okay, that was the side of his chest. And this is me taking a photograph of saying to the nurse, hey, there is something in there. You know, you can't just change a bandage on the outside. There's something still in his chest. And that was what was in his chest. 12 foot of surgical gauze. So Tommy fought that for 21 months, in and out of hospital, in and out of ICU. He fought that. His actual wound healed perfectly, even though it's ugly. It healed perfectly, so his immune system was intact. It's just that septic shock and septicemia had already been in his system, and no antibiotics could get rid of that. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean that's something we definitely never disputed any of that. I think the whole issue is obviously what you've been fighting for such a long time is trying to clear that element of his name, which had such a massive impact on his life, quite evidently, for some of the stuff that was reported about the things that happened prior to you being in a relationship and being married to him, things that were part of the downfall because of his life being turned upside down. Ultimately, like we're at a point now where, while you've cleared quite a few things up, which we appreciate, I'm really interested, and I'm sure you are, Johnston, to kind of know now, like, we've seen what you've put together, we've seen everything that you've sent to us, and we've seen a timeline, which we read out that timeline in the show of where things were at. Oh, now at this point, what happens next? What do you have to do now with all this evidence that you've presented in court previously, and what you've shown on camera and spoke about on the show today? What else do you have to do? I'm sure you're probably asking yourself the same question. What do I have to do to basically prove that he never had HIV?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's been proven. He never had HIV. With the not only the death certificate, the post-mortem, the anti-mortem, and all the testing. I guess in a way, what has to be proven is, why did this happen to him, and who is responsible, even though there is no recourse now on the person that told him he had HIV without any supporting documents, right? It's certainly not the commission. The commission came through and said exactly, that there was no diagnosis. I think the commission have learned that it is possible for somebody to test false positive on those tests, and that perhaps this next time, they're not just going to indefinitely worldwide suspend somebody, kick him out of boxing because they've tested positive on a test. I think that they will probably do more testing, rule out autoimmune diseases, rule out all these other diseases, and make accommodation for a boxer to carry on, or simply give him another test, right? Where I stand with everything, I'm very happy, even though it's taken 10 years, right? But it was a promise that I made to Tommy that I would try and find out what happened. There's still maybe just a few things that are pending out there. I know that one of your comments that you guys had made about Tony Holden is that he found it easier during Tommy's early years just to plead guilty, right? Rather than
that was the Beaufort Gazette. So we pulled that article out from, I believe it was the one of his traffic offences. I think it might have been a DUI. I think they found a handgun, and it said on there. So it was actually the Gazette that wrote that Tony Holden said. So they had spoken to Tony. They used his name. They said Tony Holden said a lot of the times you just set it up, but they just set it up where it's easier to plead guilty than try to fight the charge. So that was actually in the Beaufort Gazette. We got that from the historic newspapers. So it was, when Tommy was caught transporting a loaded firearm in Jay, Oklahoma.
Right. Yeah. That blows me away, right? Because why wasn't anything done for Tommy in 1996? all they had to do was call a physician and just say, hey, is this test result correct? Well, first of all, where is the test result? There was never one there, right? So for Tony Holden to say it's easier to be, to prove yourself, or plead guilty than non-guilty, just blows my mind. And that was the guy that was in charge of Tommy, right, at the time. What's real interesting is right now Tony Holden is facing charges as a defendant himself in a case where there's the Peoria tribe, which is the Native American Indian tribe in Oklahoma City, that run Buffalo Run Casino, which Tony Holden managed. And there's $2.1 million misappropriation of funds, embezzlement of money, and Tony Holden is a defendant. That's what's in court right now. So I am sure that he's doing his best to try and prove himself innocent and not just let it go that he's guilty. That's something that's also been withheld from the media. I think the next hearing for him is April 10th in Oklahoma City, and I think the pre-trial for him is May 1, and I think the trial is set for May 15th of this year, 2023. And it's a case that's been running since 2019 that the boxing world have not reported on. $2.1 million is a lot of money to be told that you've misappropriated from a Native American Indian tribe. So, what you said about, just letting Tommy be guilty without proving his innocence goes to show with all this is that I will and have proven that Tommy is innocent scientifically. I've proven that. I need the media now to come and support me on this. It's the mainstream media. But I tell you, it's opened up a lot of eyes out there. There's a lot of fans. There's a lot of people that are now showing that there's another side to this story, and it's based on science and not the sweet science.
I think that's one of the things me and Johnston, we kind of, one of the things we enjoy about this type of a show that we do is like there's lots of conspiracy theories out there about many different things. I mean, people think COVID was a complete conspiracy. There's so much going on in the world at the moment that everybody's wonder, there's just so much, like, it's hard with what's going on in the world at the moment that people just kind of try to brush things under the carpet a little bit. And I feel like what's happening here is we've now heard your side of the story directly from you at a point where things were happening that we couldn't have possibly have been privy to, and we're also now able to be educated on certain elements of things that you've done over the past 10 years since Tommy's passing, and it allows this whole story, this whole show, companions together to be able to be told in its entirety from different angles. So whilst there's been comments made from different elements of Tommy's life, whether it be his mother, whether it be Tony Holden, whether it be just the general journalism of the time reporting on Tommy and different moments of his life, and the one thing's for sure now, I think everybody has had the opportunity to hear from all sides when it comes down to what's happened, and it's their prerogative now to be able to go off what they believe. Now, ultimately, you've got to believe in the science. You've got to go with the compelling evidence that's being presented. And what needs to happen is someone to come out there and say, yeah, that's right. We totally, everyone 100% agrees. There's no dispute about it. And it needs to be, as you rightly put it, it needs to be reported, and it needs to be, some due diligence needs to be done so that you can make peace with that moment and that part of your life, so that you can not necessarily move on, but learn to live with what's happened, and learn to be able to know that you've got the justice that you've wanted and what he deserved.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, I lived and breathed it with Tommy, and it was something that he was very passionate about, and he wanted his fans to know the truth. You know, I'm just pretty shocked why other people will just not pick this up and run with it as well. But you're right, you know, at the end of the day, everybody goes home, goes, you know, has dinner, goes to bed. They don't live and breathe Tommy Morrison every day. There's a lot of good things happened from this. You know, what Tommy should have had was a nice small group of people that he could trust, right? That really had his back. And I think a lot of boxers need that too, or any sport. So right now he does have his own YouTube station. It's the official Tommy Morrison YouTube station, has all his fights and more information on there. He's got a new revamped website coming up as well, and also working on a movie just to show, you know, guys, this is what really happened. And so that'll be another source out there for people to look at. Yeah. And it's based on the science versus the sweet science.
And I hope that from people listening to our show and then following it up with this show, that they're able to then go out there and actually educate themselves a bit more on it. Because, you know, there's a lot of people that were looking forward to seeing what came out of this and this conversation. Yeah. And I hope for those that I've sort of messaged and said, you know, I'm really looking forward to hearing what gets said, and because there's a lot of people that I think still have that little torch, and I won't say little, but I say that torch for Tommy, because every time I speak to a fellow boxing fan, I hear the same things kind of coming out of their mouths, which is like, you know, he had this sort of really whirlwind of a career and a whirlwind of a life, and then they always say, and then it was a sad end. So, Trisha, I'm going to hand this over to you now, really, because we said we were bringing you on the show. We wanted you on the show. You've gone through a few things. You've pointed some things out. You've done a really good job of giving a compelling case to everybody that listens to this show as to, you know, where things are at from your side. But I suppose, like, not focusing on all the negative stuff that's gone on over the years, I'd love to just get like a statement to end this story in general, really, because we all talk about, you know, where things are at with this case and what you're trying to achieve, but what I think gets lost in translation a little bit is not talking about Tommy Morrison, the boxer, and Tommy Morrison, the human being.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think that a lot of people would be amazed at the Tommy Morrison that I knew. And he very much wanted people to know that he had done drug rehab, and that he actually said that he was the best counselor at this drug rehab place that he went to. And he would look at these kids and he would say, you know, I've been through everything. I know exactly what you're going to do before you even do it, right? And people would listen to him. And he would say to me, if I can just save one person's life from drugs, I'd be really happy. That's the Tommy Morrison that people should be remembering. You know, everybody has a bad childhood. Everybody goes through bad things. I guess, was perhaps lucky to have been with him where he, you know, no longer drank, right? No longer did drugs. You know, one woman was just perfectly fine, right, for him. And the boxing was his whole life. And to be with somebody that was totally depressed and kicked out, where nobody wanted to breathe the same air as him, touch his hand or hug him, was really difficult to watch. And you know, I think that you should never give up on somebody, whether they're alive or dead. And one thing I did promise to Tommy is that I would make sure that people would remember him the way he wanted them to remember him. And that was that he was a fantastic boxer, that he had completed drug rehab. He was no longer a so-called alcoholic, and he was a very humble guy. And he wanted people to realize that that was who he was. And that he would have beaten Tyson. He wanted the world to know that he would have beaten Mike Tyson.
Yeah, I love it. That is that's a
Got
great,
like the
great.
confidence, isn't you?
Yeah, well, I've got to love it. You know, this is it. I mean, like I said on the show, on the main show, Trisha, like regardless of everything that, you know, we reported on from the various incidents and newspapers and everything, like the adverse moments throughout his life, I still
Yeah.
walk away. I still walk away from recording that episode and doing that story with Tommy, and I still feel the same as I did many years ago as a child, growing up and watching boxing and watching Tommy Morrison and watching Tyson and watching Evander Holyfield and watching all those guys of the 1990s. And I still feel the same love that I have for boxing and those that are in boxing now as I did then. And it's nice to be able to get a full and complete depiction. And obviously it's not the only bit of stuff we've done on Tommy. We've done a lot of stuff on Tommy in another show where we've literally documented all of his major fights and talked about his fights and gone through a big breakdown of them moments in his career. So for us, as fans, first and foremost, it feels more like a sort of completion. But I think what would feel like a complete end for us would be hearing the news that you finally gotten to where you wanted to get with your campaign of just trying to get them to say, look, we now accept that he never had this in the first place, and someone somewhere needs to say sorry at some point, you know, for saying, look, we made a mistake and this is never going to happen.
Who do you think that, Sean, who do you think that someone is that needs to say that? I mean, I'm looking at all the physicians and the experts and the scientists that have already said that. Who do you think it is? Is it Joe Bloggs behind, you know, the keyboard? Because that's starting to happen already, and people are apologizing. You know, they're seeing what you've just seen and they're going to show, right? Who do you think it could be?
I think it has to be an organizational thing rather than just one person. I think it has to be so like when a member of a government, like in the UK, makes a mistake and does something that is really wrong, then you know the whole government really should be held accountable and they should be apologizing to the people. So in this instance,
Right.
I'd say Nevada.
They've already done that. They've
So,
already done that. The
but
commission have already done that in court
but
records.
but this is it. It's in court records, isn't it? They've not done it.
Yeah,
They've not done it in a way
publicly.
which, yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm kind of getting at. I think it's okay to go into a courtroom where people that are not so privy to it are not going to know about it. That's the problem. Like people don't know
Right,
about it. People don't know about this. You're the one that's going out there and telling people about it. And it's people like us that are finding out more information along the line and going, actually,
right,
why are these people not apologizing, or why are these people not being held liable in some way, shape, or form if a mistake has been made down the line? So I
right.
genuinely hope that, you know, that justice gets served in its entirety, and that, you know, however long it is, hopefully it won't be too much longer, but however long it is,
Yeah,
however long it may be, hopefully we can all sort of rest easy, going, do you know what, this will never happen to anybody else like that again.
Just to
yeah,
jump in is I one
yeah.
so just thinking about sort of Nevada, and so obviously they've produced tests that they they've produced evidence of tests that in actual fact they've retracted, so therefore it was a no void. I think the one thing that really bothers me as well is it's just how a matter of fact it was. I mean, I know it's 96. There was an issue just as I say, thinking about HIV and AIDS and how society's perception on it has changed over the years, and talking over 20 years, knocking on 30 years now since 96. But just how it was accepted then. That's what that's what just baffles me. That so Tommy gets this information, he gets told it, and then the whole family, his wives at the time, his brother, who obviously we did mention that obviously he went prison himself for a hellacious crime, but just how everybody accepted it is beyond me. It
Yeah,
just shows you the time, doesn't it? I think if you're trying to point the finger at anyone, it's the society in itself and on the views of HIV at the time. Like even when Tommy contracted it, you said it. Well, no, he was told he contracted it. people didn't want to be around him. People didn't want to touch him anymore. Everyone at one point in his life wanted to be around Tommy, and now all of a sudden it must have been hard
Right.
for him, because now all of a sudden no one does want to be around him because of the fact it's HIV and AIDS, and people think you can contract it by the touch of somebody. So I think it's more
Yeah.
of a society thing, isn't it? The fact is, you get told a bit of news and everyone just assumes that yes, that's the way it is, and no one contested it. There was no follow up, nothing.
Yeah.
That's what I think is the sad thing about the whole thing. So I mean,
Yeah.
at first I'm
That's
thinking,
right.
is it a conspiracy? Is it someone that's wanted him out of the picture? I think that's too far fetched to think that. I think it's errors along the way, and therefore it's just snowballed, and no one wants to come forward and say, do you know what, I've got this completely wrong.
Yeah, you know what? I totally agree with what you've said, believe it or not, right? Because everybody took it for granted, and the people that were involved were not actually experts in blood and perhaps in oncology. I need to just mention these two guys, which we haven't mentioned yet, but it just comes through with what you've just said. Here we've got Dr. Can you see it okay?
A little bit
Daniel
higher.
Einspar.
There you go.
Dr.
Yeah.
Daniel Einspar. He tested Tommy, and he found that Tommy was hemolytic anemic, right? And he also had what was called Miller-Fisher syndrome. And so he had 2 rounds of what was called IVIG treatment, which was $60,000 per round, and got him cured of that Miller-Fisher syndrome. Now, this guy, who happens to be called the same last name, Einspar, but totally different. His first name is Dr. David. He was a specialty in hematology and blood. And he found that Tommy was Coombs positive, right? Which is a blood disorder, okay? So in 2019, which is again a long, long time from 1996, there is a paper that is in PubMed, which is a medical journal, false positive 4th generation HIV test associated with autoimmune hemolytic anemia, Coombs positive, right? This is it. Nobody tested him for Coombs positive or hemolytic anemia in 1996 all the way through to 2012, 2013. They couldn't find AIDS in him. They couldn't find the virus in him, right? But along the journey, these guys here found that he was Coombs positive. And it wasn't until 2019 that a paper came out that said that you could test positive on FDA approved HIV tests if you had Coombs positive.
I think just one more thing I want to say is it is a shame then if all these people when he was alive, all these that took samples of blood from Tommy and he was coming back with negative tests, that someone didn't take it upon themselves to say, do you know what, mate, maybe we should do this live on television. You know what I mean? I think that's the problem, Trisha. I think that's where I was coming from on my angle, was that we never actually see it, did we? We're hearing
Right.
it from you now. And
Right.
we never had any doctors that actually put themselves forward and go on
Right.
national TV, out on
No
the chat
doctor.
shows like Tommy did. Tommy went on the chat shows and he was talking to all these people. So
Yeah.
what I'm seeing as a child growing up, like you, Sean, is Tommy sitting on chat shows telling anyone that he's HIV positive, telling his mother, saying even previously before he come out, even there was a document to say his mum was saying that she thought he had it before. I think she told ESPN that. So you're hearing all this stuff, and you grow
Yeah.
up with it. And, although our perceptions change on HIV, Tommy was still associated with that. Like Magic Johnson,
Right.
you think of Magic Johnson, you think HIV.
Right.
So it's
But
sometimes,
the
that's where
thing
it's
is with,
difficult, isn't it? To
yeah.
change your opinion on something, but yet they haven't got the professionals coming forward saying, you know what, 100% Tommy wasn't HIV positive.
Right. And you see everybody keeps reverting back to old news media, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you were to look at Canadian media, go back to 2012, Tommy sat there. I was right next to him. I did exactly what you said. Why wasn't there any blood draw publicly done?
Mm-hmm.
We did. We tried to do that. in 2012, we were in Montreal, and we requested that the physician come and draw the blood from Tommy and test it right in front of the public with the commission. And
he didn't show up though, did he?
They did. We showed up, but the commission didn't show up.
Yeah, that's
the
right. The
doctor
physician
didn't show up either. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's what I did read that. Yeah, after we had presented the notes, I think you said that about Canada, and I had a look at that, and yes, it does say
so we
the doctor
he
didn't
tried
show.
everything. You know, he tried everything. And now it's coming to light. All this kind of stuff, he didn't know anything about, especially the Coombs positive science journal thing. He wouldn't have known about it because that was 2019.
Yeah.
And just one last thing, Sean, before you jump in, was something you pointed out before in your notes that you weren't too best pleased with, shall I just say? On our notes suggestion, our notes actually suggested that Tommy stopped taking his medication. We suggested that. That's what we said.
Yeah.
Now, when you both began your campaign, when you decided, I'm not HIV positive, but we never, I think you felt that we said he stopped taking his medication because of you. That wasn't the case. I just wanted to clear that up before we move on. We was not saying that you had influenced him and it was because he met you. It was because it was just something we put in the same line. So sometimes it may have felt like we were saying that, but we didn't. So just to clear that up.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And that's another part of this whole thing is, was he on meds? Was he not on meds? Well, there's a simple answer to that. You do a toxicology test and report to find out whether the meds are in the system or not, right? Well, none of that was done, right? But I know firsthand from Tommy, he never took the meds. He never swallowed the meds. He may have been given the meds, but he never swallowed them or took them. And then there were physicians that wouldn't diagnose him with HIV, so they never prescribed him meds.
One last thing, I'm sorry, and you don't have to answer this. You do not have to answer this, but it's something I was tiptoeing around. But you don't have to answer, but I'm going to ask it. Did you have unprotected sex with Tommy?
We all did.
Yeah.
All of us.
Because you haven't got it, and how did you pass it on? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. You didn't have to answer that. I appreciate that.
That's all right. I've been asked that before, and that's fine.
So, guys, it's been really, really enlightening, educating, and I feel like we are able to. And for those that are listening, and of course for you guys, I hope it really has been able to enlighten you guys on maybe what you thought you knew about this situation, what you maybe seen, what you maybe heard, and to use the phrase "hearing things from the horse's mouth." I'm not insinuating that, Trisha, you are a horse, but I am certainly saying that you were there, you have lived it, you are still living it, and you have kindly come on this show to support us and to give us some more information to educate us further to what we were not privy to doing our episode, and it's been a pleasure to have you on. We've really, really thoroughly enjoyed having you on, and I genuinely hope what happens from this point forward is the conclusion. I really do. I really hope then people will sit back, listen, and go, do you know what? Actually, I agree with everything that Trisha's saying, and actually, more people do need to speak about it, and that more. Because of the use of social media and how powerful it can be for good things in this day and age, maybe that people will listen back and go, do you know what, actually, why isn't this on an agenda? Why are people not speaking about this as much as what they should be doing? And I hope that people do take away from this episode that actually that should be something that we essentially all do, which is to challenge people, challenge decisions. If a decision you don't think is correct, why don't you challenge it? Why do you sit back and just accept it? And that is something that I've taken away from this whole experience with the story of Tommy, with speaking to you for this episode, Trisha, is the one thing that you should always do in life is if you're not happy with something, if there's something you don't feel is 100% right, then you should challenge it, appeal it, whatever it is you need to do, you have to do it for the sake of that peace of mind, knowing that you've exhausted every avenue possible to be able to get the outcome that you have been either looking for, or if it's not looking for, at least getting clarity on it, so that you can get that peace of mind knowing that you've done everything possible and you've got an ultimate answer on it. And I think that's the overarching theme of this conversation, and with yourself, Trisha. So I just want to finally say thank you to yourself for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Let's just get the word out. Let's get all this information out, and just keep following. It's not finished yet.
Nope, it's certainly not over yet. And if anything comes out, we'd love to have you back on. We'd love to report in further as an addendum. But for now, for everybody listening, if you want to follow,
Trisha.
yes,
Thank
good
you.
luck as well. And if everybody for listening, if you want to go and follow on social media, please, you can find Trisha on social media. Trisha, I'm going to leave that to you to just fire out any handles of social media.
Right, yeah. Well, we've got the official Tommy Morrison YouTube channel, TommyTheDukeMorrison.com for his website. And then, of course, you can find me through you guys, but also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And it's either Tommy Trisha Morrison or Trisha Tommy Morrison. So you can find us, hopefully.